Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by James Copley and Phil Smith. As always, not a particularly nice way to start a Monday morning. This one, another relatively lacklustre performance from Sunderland at the weekend and a 1-0 defeat at the hands of Swansea City at the Stadium of Light. Phil, I'll come to you first. I mean, this was a bit of a disappointing one from Sunderland's perspective, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a really, really poor performance. I think that obviously we all, probably anticipated that there'd be a little bit of a dip in terms of the intensity in the games when, we essentially knew where Sunderland were going to finish. And obviously the rotation of the team is having an impact on the performances. And I think we'd accept all that. But I think obviously the concern is, just how little Sunderland are creating at the moment, I think is probably the big thing. And I think that's contributing to a little bit of sort of fatigue and a little bit of flatness just around the whole mood around the place, I think, really. It feels like we're almost limping along, waiting for the playoffs. And Saturday kind of embodied that. There was no real intensity until probably after the Fane Ender came on, which was an hour into the game. The first half from a Sunderland perspective felt almost totally like a non-event. So I don't know, really. It just depends how you feel about it, other than it was not a great watch, and a lot of people understandably will feel like they probably wasted their Saturday afternoon. I think it depends how concerned you are, is how quickly you think someone can switch back on. That's the big question, isn't it? That I don't have the answer to, so I'm going to pass it over to James.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it, James? Obviously the performance is one thing, the result is another, but the big concern is going to be momentum and a lack thereof, and then the ability to regain it heading into a guaranteed playoff campaign. Now, I mean, what did you make of Saturday's display, and what do you think it says about Sunderland's ability to really have a go at these playoffs?
Yeah, I think it was poor. It's absolutely not the best Sunderland can play. They aren't in form at the moment. I do think this has perhaps been bubbling away under the surface for a little while in terms of Sunderland's performances. Like, haven't really been amazing, have they, since the Coventry City game, in which they lost 3-0. Yes, they've won a couple of games since then, but the performances in terms of attacking hasn't really been there. So I am a little bit concerned coming at the playoffs, although I do understand that Regis Lebris is rotating. I think mentally they're probably in a little bit of a weird spot. But at the end of the day, there's 43,000 people in that stadium. I was talking to my mate, and he paid, I think, 70 quid or 65 quid for him and his girlfriend to go. So you always have a responsibility to those fans in the stadiums as well to perhaps do a little better, regardless of the spot you find yourself in. And I think Sunderland do need to go into those playoffs with some momentum. I hope it'll come. I really want to see them sort of click going forward, because I think, they've shown that they can defend really well and really stoically. Swansea aside, which came from a set piece that perhaps shouldn't have been given in the first place. But, Sunderland's 2 wins after the Coventry game have come by set piece goals, haven't they? They haven't scored from open play very much at all in recent times. So it is concerning, I think. But the good thing is they've got enough time to sort of play the way back into form, haven't they? And I think, is it sort of human nature that this happens? I think probably yes, because that carrot of the automatics is gone, hasn't it? You hope that Sunderland have enough about them to sort of come back into it for the playoff campaign, and with a few players hopefully coming back from injury as well. That was a positive of last week, wasn't it? Enzo Lefebvre looks like he's going to be very, very important. So I think it's not like an absolute crisis for me. I'm not really worried, but like in 2 games' time, if this is still happening, I'll probably be a little bit more worried. I think they've just got enough time to sort of sort it out now.
I mean, you sort of alluded to it already, Phil, but there has perhaps been a slight drop-off, or sort of notable drop-off in Sunderland's attacking intensity and their creation of chances in recent weeks. I mean, what do you sort of attribute that to, and how do you think Lebris goes about trying to rectify it?
I'm not too sure. That's the bit of the game that I can't really get my head around. I think that you can obviously understand and almost anticipate to an extent that the intensity of Sunderland's play might drop off when, as we talked about, there isn't that sort of incentive of the top 2 or the jeopardy of dropping out the top 6. I can't understand why the attacking patterns and the passing and the creativity would drop so significantly. I'm finding that quite hard to get my head around. I think that sort of we asked Lebris about this after the game, and he felt it was a case of mainly because of the disruption in the team, because of the changes that he's making. You know, he made the point of Trey Hume sort of moving to left back, Chris Rigg moving over to the left side of the midfield three. On Saturday, you've got players in positions and new combinations that haven't played together very much. So obviously, you know, that triangle down the right side on Saturday was Brown, Harrison Jones, and Patrick Roberts, who I don't think have ever played together before at the same time. So I think there is that thing of like there's a lack of familiarity, and it's making it all a bit disjointed, and it's not as instinctive and as quick as it was earlier in the season. So I do understand that point, and I think there will be a natural. I think, you know, when Job comes back to play on the left hand side of the midfield three, you know, when you get back to Roberts and Hume, whenever that may be, connecting down the right, you probably will see a little bit of an improvement. But it is something I'm a little bit concerned about in terms of, I do think there's time for someone to play the way back into form. I'm not overly concerned about that. I think you've got 2 fixtures this weekend where you've got to be sensible. Like, I don't want Enzo Lefebvre in 90 minutes twice in 4 days. Do you know what I mean? You've still then got 2 fixtures with 2 blocks of training after that before the playoffs. So I do think there's an opportunity when you get to that Oxford game to kind of say, right, come on, you know, let's go with what we want to look like for the playoffs. So I'm not hugely concerned generally about the situation. I genuinely think Lebris is doing the right thing with the changes in the rotation. I do have a little bit of concern about the level of attacking play, because at the moment, it is way off in my opinion. And you know, Lebris seems pretty confident that it'll click fairly quickly once he starts naming a more familiar side. I sincerely hope he's right about that.
I think Phil's touched on a good point there as well, Jace. In defence of Lebris, if he wasn't rotating now, there would be calls for him to do so, quite vocal ones as well. He's probably doing the right thing, isn't he, in terms of having almost a little bit of a mini pre-season, isn't it, to get everybody back up to speed, to get some of the injured lads back in. But it is still just a little bit concerning, because we've seen what Sunderland can do from an attacking sense, and it's way off that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like he's sort of trying to strike something of a balance here, isn't he? You know, obviously there is the need to, like, you know, keep certain players slightly out of the firing line, if you like. And obviously Lefebvre is one who is a very obvious example of that. But I also think if you look at someone like an Eliza Mayenda, you know, I think given the fact that, especially since Lebris confirmed last week that we're not going to see Jayden Danns this season, there comes a much more heightened need to sort of ensure that both Mayenda and Isidore are fit and ideally firing, but certainly available heading into that playoff campaign. You know, I think obviously one of the more obvious points of debate at the moment is that left wing position, and obviously people are talking about Tommy Watson. I do also think as well, where Watson is concerned, it's worth pointing out that, like, he hasn't had a great deal of football since his own injury. You know, he's probably playing himself back up to speed a little bit in that respect. But certainly, you know, there's people calling for Mayenda to come in on that left flank and say, well, you can do that all you like, but then suddenly you're in a position where if anything happens to him, you know, suddenly you're looking a little bit threadbare point of attack, aren't you? And it's all about, I guess, trying to, you know, keep as many of those key players as healthy as possible heading into the playoffs. But then at the same time, there has to be a certain amount of focus on maintaining some kind of momentum, because it's not as easy as simply picking it up again if it completely fizzles out. You know, I fully agree with you, James. You know, you said before that we're not in a crisis. Obviously, you know, Sunderland are in a playoff position, and who could have foreseen that at the beginning of the season? But I do also think that, you know, there is something to be said for heading into a playoff campaign with a little bit of confidence. And I think the big concern for a lot of people, Phil, is that maybe the mood has slightly shifted. I mean, do you think that's the case, or do you think it's not something to be overly concerned about?
Yeah, yes and no. I think there definitely is a little bit of a mood shift, and I can understand just from a very basic point of, you know, it's been a bit of a slog watching Sunderland over the last couple of weeks. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that that's another. I'm not sure how entirely concerned I am about that, because I think when the season ends and we get those playoff fixtures and you know who Sunderland are playing and you know when they're playing, and I think there'll be a big sort of refocus and a big reset. And I've got no doubt that the atmosphere around those playoffs games is going to be unbelievable. And I think at that point you will have that sense of, you know what, we've had a good season. This is incredibly exciting. We've got this opportunity to go and do something special. I think I don't have a huge amount of concern about that, to be honest. I think there'll be a natural sort of deep breath when we get to the end of the season. Right, we start again now and we go again. I just think it is a really tricky one, because you've alluded to it there in terms of like the flip side of it would be if Lebris was just picking his strongest team, in inverted commas, and the end had got an injury playing off the left wing or what have you, then all of a sudden you've only got one striker potentially for the playoffs. And I do think he's in a little bit of a difficult position. I mean, the striker thing especially, like, it just underlines, we've talked about a lot over the last couple of days, like, you really need three strikers, don't you? And the dance thing, like, I obviously, he had no symptoms. It's something that came out from nowhere in the medical late on deadline day, which makes it hard to find somebody else. I sympathise with that, but there's no getting past the point that it leaves Lebris with a real headache now in the next few weeks, because as you mentioned, he's got a sort of wrap Isidore and Meander up in cotton wool, and that obviously, as you say, because of Meander's versatility, that has an impact on other positions where other players aren't available. People like Jan Paveda, another sort of big signing last summer, who just has never really been available this season. And so I do sympathise with Lebris a bit, because some of those key players isn't quite the right word, but those players who were supposed to be the ones knocking on the door now, giving him the option to rotate, to look after some of the other players and offer competition, just aren't there. And I think that makes this balancing that quite tricky for him at the moment. So as I say, I don't worry so much about the mood. I just think naturally it's going to be that aspect of things is going to be like a switch. I think when the season's over and it's like playoff time, it's going to be like, right, here we go. I think everyone will actually relish having that competitiveness back. I think you'll see a real sort of excitement again. But it's important that, as I say, I think those last few games of the season are going to be really important, because I think at that point you'll be able, Lebris, because of the schedule easing, you'll be able to focus a little bit more on putting a more familiar team out. And I think hopefully what we'll see is then something to be a bit more convincing, and that'll sort of allay a lot of fears. But I guess time.
And I mean, we are seeing some players sort of come back into the fold and bolster his ranks a little bit, James. Obviously, we've already mentioned him, but Enzo Lefebvre got another half hour under his belt against Swansea. Sunderland seemed to improve, relatively notably when he came onto the pitch. I mean, let's not tempt fate too much, because obviously we did it with Romain Mundle the other week and he's sidelined again now. But, if Sunderland can keep Enzo Lefebvre fit, I mean, how much of an impact can he potentially have over that playoff campaign?
Huge. I think having him fit is a game changer. I don't think there's too many players like him in the Championship in terms of his ability. I think it's noticeable how much better he is than everybody else on the pitch, and I mean that with the best will in the world, because Sunderland have some really, really good players, but Enzo Lefebvre just seems to be a cut above for me, and I think he probably improves people around him and makes people look a little better as well. There's that old adage, isn't there, that you're only as good as the players you're playing around, and I think Enzo Lefebvre's a case in point. So yeah, I don't want to get too excited about it, because as you say, we've been there in recent weeks, but for me, when he came on against Norwich as well, he looked really, really promising. So I think you just got to play the long game with him, nurse him back until the playoffs. Be interesting to see, actually, as Phil says, with this little 2-game block coming up, whether he starts one or not. But yeah, hugely, hugely talented, and I think it's just his range of passing, something a little bit different as well. The way he moves, the way he looks to get Sunderland on the front foot. I'm excited by him for sure.
And we also saw Sam Ed come on and play a part against Swansea. Phil, I mean, he's not a player who I think it's fair to say has really hit any kind of momentum this season, but were there signs from him perhaps that he can still play some kind of role in Sunderland's camp?
Yeah, it was a weird cameo, wasn't it? Because I feel like the headline was obviously that fairly simple switch of play that he put out a touch, and then he gave a cheap foul away, didn't he? And it kind of came away as like, I did actually think he had a positive impact when he first came on. I actually thought he quickened Sunderland's play up a little bit. He showed a bit of urgency. I thought he looked much sharper than he had previously in the season. I thought he was getting about the pitch much, much better. So I think at this stage, it's really hard, isn't it, to sit here and say, Sam Ed's going to be a big player for the playoffs, because I just don't think we've seen enough over the course of the season. The one thing I will say is this is good news for Sunderland, because this means that we can manage Dan Neil, in particular, his minutes over the next, particularly the Easter weekend. And I think he's crying out for a little bit of a break, to be honest, because I think everyone knows, I sometimes get a bit of stick for always defending him, but I think he's a brilliant player. but he's not at his best level at the moment, in my opinion. And I think that Samed being back just gives Brees the opportunity, whether it's to let Neil sit a game out, whether it's to just give him an hour for the next couple of games, whatever it is. I think that's going to be massive in terms of the playoffs. It means that you don't have to sort of give Job too much of a workload when he comes back in this weekend. So I do think that was one of the biggest positives from Saturday, actually, was getting a midfielder back who can just allow Brees to manage the squad really sensibly in the weeks ahead. As I say, I'm not ruling out Samed making a little bit of a go at this because I thought he looked much, much sharper. It's just whether we can get that rhythm, that passing, that touch back for the playoffs. There is a massive question mark over that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I'm not trying to kid anyone on. But I do think that was a genuine positive for a few different reasons going into these next few games.
I mean, it's such a bizarre one, isn't it, James? You know, when he came in and when you looked at his resume and his pedigree, I think everybody thought that he was really going to, you know, almost take the championship by the scruff of the neck and have a real positive loan spell. I mean, obviously it hasn't worked out for that one reason or another, injuries, just general lack of sharpness, I think it's fair to say. But it's just been such a weird season for him, hasn't it?
Yeah, I do feel for him because it's been so stop-start. Obviously, he signed with that injury, didn't he? It took him longer than anticipated. He then comes back and then gets a little bit of a reoccurrence or whatever it was. And it's very hard for players to gain momentum in those sorts of situations. I agree with Phil. I thought it was probably by and large the best he's looked in a Sunderland shirt from what I've seen of him. I thought he was actually quite good, as Phil says, apart from those sort of two headline mistakes. I thought he moved the ball well and he injected a little bit of urgency and pace into his play, which I think he needs to do, to be honest, because time's definitely running out at Sunderland. I think he can be an important player for the reasons Phil mentioned. Obviously allows a bit of rest and rotation, and it's sort of like a bit of a ace in the hole at this point, isn't it? Like if Samed turns out to be really good for the playoffs, that's a real bonus. Like if he can contribute, that's a real bonus. I don't think we're really expecting him to at the moment, given what's gone on this season beforehand. But if he can get back and get playing to the level we know that he can, it could be a little bit of a boost heading into it. And yeah, it does offer the chance to freshen that midfield up, and he does add a little bit of experience in that midfield as well. So I think watch this space with him, but he needs to sort of prove during these last 4 or 5 games, doesn't he, that he's worthy of the shirt and that he can compete for a place. Because, like, if you name your playoff semi-final team now, Samed's definitely not in it, is he? Which is strange, really, given his pedigree and what we all thought we were getting at the start of the season. But it just hasn't materialised, and sometimes it happens that way. Unfortunately for Sunderland, it's happened with a couple of players this season.
Speaking of unexpected boosts, Phil, Lebris obviously last week in his press conference, he was talking about Adji, Niall Huggins, Jensen Seal, perhaps suggesting that they're a little bit closer to return to action than any of us might have expected at one point.
Yeah, I still think with like Huggins in particular, like I'd be amazed if we see Huggins again this season, just because he's been out for so long, you know. But Lebris was like really positive about him in terms of the progress he's made, and I think he just didn't want to rule anything out because I think he was like, look, I think he's expected to return to non-contact training either this week or next, and I think he just said, look, he's really well connected with the team. So let's see. But I mean, I think it's hard to imagine Huggins playing a major role this season. And you're not going to put him back in for a playoff game, are you? I don't think. But obviously, in terms of first and foremost, for a player who's just had the worst luck imaginable with injury, I mean, it's absolutely fantastic that he's sort of getting back to fitness, and hopefully for next season, that's a huge boost for Sunderland as well, because we saw how good he could be last year. I think Elise is obviously a little bit of a different case because, yes, he will be short of match fitness. He hasn't played since January. But if he's able to get a couple of good blocks of training in before the playoffs, then there's absolutely no reason why he couldn't be on the bench and potentially be a little bit of an impact sub. And given how vulnerable we've been in that position in terms of Dennis Serkin, that's potentially an absolutely massive boost. Don't forget as well that, touch wood that we get there, there's a decent gap between the semi-finals and the final. So even if you're not necessarily ready to play a huge part in the semi-finals, if you were able to get through them, and hopefully Sunderland will, then you've got another 10 days to the final. So I think it's potentially a real boost that. As I say, nobody's sitting here saying Elise is going to be back playing 90 minutes on Friday. It's going to be a bit of a race against time, obviously, but just have that little bit of extra defensive cover. I think, especially a left-sided player we've talked about, is potentially really, really, really good news. That offset the Jadon Dan's news somewhat, which obviously is a really big blow for all the reasons we mentioned before that.
I mean, the Elise news sort of caught me off guard a little bit, James, because we were there the game that he picked up that injury against Stoke City, and we were both just immediately kind of in agreement that it looked really serious. And I mean, the noise since then has been that it was probably going to be pre-season. So, as Phil said, I mean, if he can get back and play any kind of role over the remainder of the campaign, playoff campaign, whatever it might be, I mean, really welcome boost for Sunderland.
Yeah, huge boost. I mean, when everybody's fit and firing, Sunderland's defensive line, there's an argument to say that Adji Elisi could be one of Sunderland's best centre-backs. When he was playing at centre-back earlier on in the season, it was a big blow when he got that initial injury, wasn't it? Obviously, he fought his way back and then got injured in January again. But yeah, can cover left-back, centre-back, definitely a massive boost. Adds height, adds experience. He's a player I really, really like. So yeah, I think having him as an option would be massive, definitely, especially with the noises on Dennis Sergan, not too bad either.
Absolutely. Another interesting selection choice at the weekend, Phil. We saw Harrison Jones handed his first league start. Obviously, he's been impressing hugely for the under-21s this season, and he has had the odd cameo here and there. I mean, what do you make of his full championship debut?
Yeah, I thought he did okay. I thought he was maybe a little bit tentative. Like, I've seen him be a bit more decisive in games and that, both for the under-21s and at times when he's come on for the first team as well. So it was a difficult game for him to come into, really, because as we discussed earlier, Sunderland were just so poor in an attacking sense, and they had so little of the ball that I'm not sure he was really able to show what he's all about. And I think it's one of those where maybe the next time he starts a game, and listen, with the schedules coming up, especially over Easter weekend, there's every chance he will get another start at some point. I'm sure he'd be an awful lot better for it, and we'll kind of see him being a bit more incisive on the ball. But I think it's a great story because we've known for a while that he's a really talented player, but I don't think at the start of the season it was necessarily expected that he'd be someone who'd be pushing for first team starts. I mean, even as recently as January, we were potentially looking at him possibly going on the National League, weren't we? And there was a bit of expectation that would probably happen. You know, and it's testament to the way that he trains every single day, and the fact that he's got up to the level of his teammates, and Lebris is trusting him to play in the games as well. So, I just think it's a really lovely story. Really, it just goes to show if you knuckle down, then anything's possible. And I think James has spoken to Harrison Jones a few times, and someone who absolutely loves the club and just is absolutely relishing what's in front of him. Even just being on the bench is such a big deal for him, and I think that's absolutely lovely. The one interesting thing it raises is, like, should we be a little bit concerned that Milan Alexic isn't getting picked in that position when Lebris is rotating, because that's his position, right? And listen, like, we know obviously the first season's about adjustment for Alexic, and we saw with Mienda last year, he kind of was so much stronger in his second season. I'm not sure. I'm going to throw that out, James. There's a little bit of a worry that Alexic isn't really being considered to play in centre midfield at this point in quite low risk games.
I think so, because he was so clearly brought to the club as a central midfielder and an attacking one at that, and Harrison Jones definitely played furthest forward of that three. So I think you're right to raise that. I really feel a bit sorry for Milan Alexic, because when he comes in and starts, it's out of the blue, and he starts like on the right wing or the left wing, and it's not really his position, although he does possess some good pace. I'm not like worried about it long term, because I think there's enough time for him to turn it round, and I am reminded of that Mienda case study where it's prudent not to write a player off too early, because it is about adjustment and such like. But then there's, on the flip side of that, there's the example of Jewison Bennett as well, who was a very talented player but didn't get a run, and then was, perhaps played a little bit out of position. So I'm interested to see how it goes, because I actually quite like Milan Alexic. I think he's very talented. He's got good pace, good attributes. Touches on the ball are very good, but it's, again, we always say, don't we, it's very hard to get like a head of steam up unless you've played 5, 10, 15 games in a row, and he's just not getting that at the moment. I think it's a very interesting question, in a sense that will he get that next season? We don't know. It obviously depends on Sunderland's sort of position, whether that's in the Premier League or the Championship. Just circling back to Harrison Jones, though, I think it is a really nice story, because I think the player in his camp would have definitely have been open to going out on loan in January. And then with a few injuries and the way he's sort of knuckled down, as Phil says, and impressed, Regis Labrise wanted him as part of his sort of squad. And I don't think you can pay him any higher compliment than that. He is a very, very nice lad to talk to, very driven, but very down to earth as well. And his brother's not half bad as well, who's just sort of stepped up to the under-21s. Jaden Jones, he's a good little player. So it is a nice story, and I'm sort of excited to see where Harrison Jones goes from here, because that academy just keeps on producing. I mean, just going a little off-piste here, but Felix Scott, 16 years old, stepped up the past 2 games and scored 3 and 2, started one game against Tottenham, came off the bench against Villa, and he all of a sudden is looking very good. I'm like with Garagousi, and I'm hesitant to big them up too much because they are so young and there's so much can happen. But that academy is just so vibrant, and Harrison Jones really is sort of at the forefront of that at the moment. Obviously, you've had the success stories of Rigneil and Patterson, but Jones has been the new standard bearer in a way. The sort of competence in which he's captained the under-21s, his general attitude, his sort of behaviour around the club has been exemplary, and I think he deserves everything he's getting at the moment. On his performance on Saturday, wasn't like hugely impressive or anything, but I thought he did sort of the basics well. As Phil says, tough for him to come in. I think he's only going to get better, and I'm excited to see where he goes.
Absolutely. Feels like a bit of a conveyor belt at the moment, doesn't it, James? Just to change direction a little bit, Phil. Last week we heard that Sunderland have open discussions with fans about the prospect of moving away supporters back down into the lower bowl. Just sort of interested to get your thoughts on this, and whether you think it would be a wise move. I know there's been some people complaining about atmosphere at the stadium for a little while now.
Yeah, I'm really going to give you a really poor answer. I'm not sure about this. I think the moving the away fans into the low ball would improve the atmosphere. I think it's just like a natural thing of, we know from Sunderland's away support as well, which is basically the best around. I think having the away fans, you're going to get a level of noise for basically 90 minutes from an away support, and I think the to and fro, between then the home fans that are around them, that just sort of naturally happens. The reaction if the opposition score and they celebrate, and I think the home fans around them then reacting to that, I do think you get a better, more natural atmosphere when the away fans are in the lower bowl. Would it improve it enough to make it worth, obviously, the disruption to home fans because it's been a long time the away fans have been up there? You're going to be moving season card holders of years and years. Potentially to do that. I don't know whether you would improve it so much to make it worth that disruption and potential disappointment, but I think the atmosphere thing for me, it's still there in terms of the stadium. Like the Luton leg was absolutely unbelievable a couple of years back. That was with the away fans up there. The second leg, because we're basically going to finish fourth, is going to be unbelievable. I just think it's the way football's gone a little bit. We go up and down the country, and I'll get James' thoughts on this in a minute. There aren't loads of places at the moment where the atmosphere is unbelievable. I don't think Sunderland's an exception, where a lot of the time the atmosphere is quite flat. I wonder if that's the way the style of the games has gone a little bit. There are a lot of games in the Championship where, especially at the Stadium of Light, and I think a lot of teams, not just Sunderland in the top half, get this, where the opposition put a lot of players behind the ball, they slow it down. Your centre halves are having a lot of possession. It's quite slow. I don't think it's conducive to a great atmosphere. So I think for me, I think it's I think the level of the Championship's improved, but I think maybe the style of the games isn't as conducive as to a really raucous atmosphere as it once was. So I do think it's worth exploring, because I think it will improve the atmosphere. But I have to say, I don't think this is a Sunderland thing. There haven't been many atmospheres this season where I've been this is brilliant. Plymouth was one. The atmosphere there was rocking. There's a lot. I think I'm not sure this is just a Sunderland thing. I think this is a bit more wider in terms of football, to be honest.
I think a lot of it's circumstantial as well in terms of what's on the game. I would say the best atmospheres I've been in this season would be Leeds away, Middlesbrough away, and Coventry away. Now, all of those games had an asterisk attached to them. Leeds United pushing for promotion against a potential promotion rival, hoping to sneak in there. Really, really good atmosphere. Middlesbrough game, Teesway derby, hugely exciting game, as Phil mentioned, back and forth, 3-2. A bit of a throwback in a way, in a sense, the way the game went. Both teams trying to achieve something. Thought the atmosphere was superb. Coventry City absolutely hate us under Frank Lampard. Sort of new life, new manager, really rejuvenated, heading for a playoff spot or fighting for a playoff spot. And I thought that was a tremendous atmosphere. In terms of moving the away fans down, I would like to see it. I think Phil's right to mention disrupting fans, but I think it's good that the club are going to have those conversations with the fan groups. I think that's really important. So I think like the home atmosphere is sort of everybody's responsibility, isn't it? So I would encourage like fans to get involved with Red and White Army and the local branch, supporters branch, all of that stuff, because they do listen and you will get a say. I think it's really important. I think like generally the atmosphere at the stadium of like, and I remember this from when I was a season ticket holder as well, because I used to do exactly the same thing, but like sometimes you're in there 5 minutes after the opening whistle because there's queues in the concourse and whatnot, and maybe you're coming over to the ground late because historically there's not been too much around the ground. Obviously that's changing now. You've got the sheepfolds and that area generally is being redeveloped, so perhaps that would help. But I think there's so much that goes into a home atmosphere that it's a multi-layered problem. I'm not sure just bringing the away fans down would like transform the atmosphere for 46 games, but I think it would help. But there are other factors as well. I've gone on long-winded there, but I think there's a lot to it. And Phil's actually right to mention sort of the style of games anymore. It's like it's not back to front Quinn and Phillips anymore, is it? Just generally across the spectrum in the EFL and the Premier League, games are more about the build-up and stuff like that now.
I think like there's a lot of times, and the reason why I mentioned other grounds is because I think West Brom's a great example. So we went to West Brom a few weeks ago, and West Brom, it was all on the line for them in terms of their playoff place and stuff. And the atmosphere there wasn't great. And I think that's in part because their two centre-halves were passing the ball to each other for like 75% of the game. Like, I do think that impacts the atmosphere. And there were times at the start of the season where the stadium light was rocking, like Chef Wade and the start of the Middlesbrough game. Like the atmosphere was genuinely brilliant. We don't see games like that a lot at the moment, partially because I do think Sunderland's intensity has dropped massively since the turn of the year. But also because the opposition were like, we should probably stop playing out from the back and pressing Sunderland because they're going to pick us off. So I do think there's loads that goes into it. I would definitely be genuinely exploring the possibility of moving the away fans, because I do think it would make a difference, especially if you get up to the Premier League. I do think it would have a positive impact on the atmosphere, but it's definitely not like an immediate cure, I think. And as I say, I'm not sure cure is the right word, because I do think when it needs to be, the Stadium of Light is still capable of really sort of bringing it. I think there's a lot of reasons why of late it maybe hasn't been what we associate with it, but I think that's a lot to do with the football, to be honest. But that's just my personal opinion.
There's not loads of grounds that I can think of up and down the country as well where the away fans are so far away from like the core home support in the Roker end. Like Phil touched upon it, but it doesn't feel like they've got the opportunity to bounce off each other very much. Now I remember when the away fans were in the Roker end and everybody was right next to each other, and you had the crazy corner sort of in its pomp and its heyday. There was a real back and forth, and I think that does help generate a lot of atmosphere as well.
Okay, good stuff. Should we call it there then, lads? That's all we've got time for in this week's show. Join us again next week when we'll be discussing all of the latest Sunderland news and developments. In the meantime, follow all the latest Black Cats news on the Sunderland Decor. You can give us a follow on social media as well. Thanks to James. Thanks to Phil. Thanks to you for listening. We'll see you next week.